Reporting live from Dudesseldorf, it's the news with Mike Dawson.
Yes, live from Dudesseldorf. We touched on this at the beginning of the show, but it's worth talking about again. Eddie Van Halen is dead at 65, the guitarist for Van Halen. The news was broke to the world by his son and Kalen Bean's former schoolmate, Wolfie Van Halen. He tweeted, "I can't believe I'm having to write this, but my father, Edward Ludwig Van Halen, has lost his long and arduous battle with cancer this morning. He was the best father I could ever ask for. Every moment I've shared with him on and off stage was a gift. My heart is broken, and I don't think I'll ever fully recover from this loss. I love you so much, Pop."
Whenever I think about him, I think of a sort of a little bit of a tortured soul and maybe a certain amount of waste. I guess I look at everything as sort of potential in life. I'm very waste-oriented. I don't mind regular folk who have regular jobs and do what they do, but then sometimes I see someone who's amazingly talented and gifted and has that background, but yet so much energy seemed to go out to arguing or, like Van Halen in any iteration, whether it was David or whether it was Sammy, I just feel like that they're just gone. They should have just been churning out albums and touring and wowing crowds for the last 20 years, like nonstop. And yet, no.
Well, Eddie Van Halen's body of work is probably the strongest of, I would say, any guitarist throughout rock and roll. All of his work, Van Halen never released anything bad. They never cut a bad record. But when you talk about, other artists that maybe we lost a little too soon, like Stevie Ray Vaughan, you'd be thinking about what would he be doing today? I think the difference between that and Eddie Van Halen is we can look back on Eddie's catalog and say, okay, he did it. He gave it all to us.
No, I agree. I feel sad because it makes me feel old because Van Halen was just one of those bands that reminded me of being young, and they're just always ubiquitous and had all those hits. I think my favorite, I told Max Apad to pull it, was, now he's got to hit up Kalen, but it's a deep, well, not a deep cut, but Ain't Talking About Love. It didn't get the spins that, it doesn't get the spins now that a lot of Van Halen hits get, but this was just an unbridled rock and roll song. Like, it just started beginning, middle, end, just the beginning.
And there are certain guitar players that just by their tone,
well, you know who they are.
You know who they are.
Right.
Eddie Van Halen's certainly one of those guys.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah, Adam.
We're all enjoying ourselves.
I get that, yeah.
Kids like to have a good time.
Yeah.
I actually do cover this one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we play it. A version of it.
It's got almost, it's raw and it's got almost a little punk to it.
One of my favorite guitar riffs ever.
Yeah.
In Van Halen's earlier days, when they'd be playing the Whiskey, when they were Van Halen with David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen would often take a note from the book of bluesman Robert Johnson and turn his back to the crowd because so many guitarists would be going to Van Halen shows to see, okay, what the hell is Eddie doing? How does he do that? And he'd play with his back to the crowd so that they couldn't steal his licks.
Turn the song down. I can't hear it.
Bring it. Sorry. You. Brian, you're low on our side, so
they're coming off the same feed because Dawson had the songs loaded on his computer, but he's doing the news and he brought it in. So
you can bring it down. It's fine.
My mind works a little slower these days, so I just put two and two together. I look ahead. We have a guest calendar for anyone who's listening. And I like to look ahead, see who's coming up, do a little research, see which guests I'm not going to be allowed to talk to. And I saw tomorrow that, August also makes mistakes, like frequently. Like he put Candace Owen on the calendar. I was like, well, it's got to be Candace Owens or whatever it was. And I saw tomorrow Patty Smythe is going to be on with an E. And I did a Google search. I'm like, is that the singer? And Patti Smythe of the Knee is a muscular therapist, so I can only assume it's the singer, who I'm a huge fan of, and I just learned she was offered the lead singer role in Van Halen between David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar.
I did not know that. I did
We'll have
know
to bring that up tomorrow.
her first role was in Gentle Ben in 1961. That much I know, but we'll talk to them. All right. Well, anyway, a sad loss. And I never met Eddie Van Halen. I don't think I had a conversation with him. I can tell you, I didn't know much about, for a guy who's been in this town for a long time and sort of talked to everybody, I never really spoke to any of the Van Halen brothers. I probably talked to David Lee Roth maybe a time or two. Seems like David
took over for Howard Stern at the same time.
Right. Seems like those two would be volatile together. And then there's, what's the bass player's name?
Michael Anthony.
Michael Anthony.
Some call him the most fortunate bass player in all of rock and roll.
Michael Anthony is easily one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life.
Absolutely.
Just the friendliest, not nicest rock and roll guys, just one of the nicest guys. So it's interesting that he then got sandwiched in between some of the biggest head cases in the world. And I will say Sammy Hagar is a very nice guy as well. Kind of a driven businessman, but a very friendly guy. So anyway, all right, well, he'll be missed.
Well, there's lots of music news today, so before we get into more serious stuff, AC/DC releasing their first single in however many years. It seemed that, remember when AC/DC was on their last tour and they had Axl Rose fill in for the last few shows of their tour.
Is Brian Johnson still in the band? I thought
Brian Johnson is back. It seemed that everybody, the band was basically dead. Yeah, drummer Phil Rudd sat out the entire last tour because he was in New Zealand arrested for attempting to procure a murder. That case ended with him only receiving 8 months on house arrest. Singer Brian Johnson missed the last 23 dates because of hearing loss. So he could no longer sing because hearing is an important part of singing. If you can't hear what note you're singing, you can't do it. And then bassist Cliff Williams just said he'd had enough and it was over. But during the last 4 years, Angus Young and the last members of the Back in Black lineup are back. The new single, it's called Shot in the Dark. It was released at midnight in New York today. And they're saying that there's some experimental hearing treatment that Brian Johnson was able to undergo. It took several years and lots of microbes, or lots of wires in his head.
Stuff?
No, it's a piece of machinery that somehow. But they're not really giving us too much on it. But the funny thing about AC/DC is there's an old radio joke that AC/DC is a great band. I love their song. Because a lot of their songs are very much the same. We got a little clip of what you can hear from the new single. And that's all they're giving us. It sounds AC/DC.
Yeah, Brian Johnson's a big vintage car racing guy. And there was some story that the crazy loud cars did him in the decibel department because there are painstakingly loud vehicles, but I think it's the rock and roll that probably did him in. It's the thing about, but he's a huge vintage car guy, which is huge in Europe and does a lot of racing. And there was a series called Going Racing with Brian Johnson or some version of that. I can't think of what it was called, but it was a good kind of thing. He would go out, he would test drive these cars. He'd take these old multi-million-dollar Jags and stuff and put them on the track in Europe and drove in these events. And it was an interesting Cars That Rock. Oh, yeah. Of course, it's got to be called Cars That Rock.
Your show is called Going Racing.
Oh, mine was called Going Racing, but not with Brian Johnson.
No.
Oh, okay. That's different. Yeah, Cars That Rock, of course. But it was good. It was kind of a cool show for real vintage car guys.
It's funny we're talking about this on the day that Eddie Van Halen died, because, Dawson, I'm sure you're on the same page. Angus Young is a very underrated guitarist. That guy can fucking rock.
He is, absolutely. And another one of those guys who just has that tone that Angus is Angus, and he's irreplaceable. Now, if it was Malcolm Young, Angus's brother who played rhythm guitar for AC/DC, he passed away after battling dementia for a couple of years. Now, if that was Angus Young who died, AC/DC would be done. AC/DC is Angus Young.
Well, it's bizarre to think of touring and bands and stadiums and arenas and rock and people on their feet and chicks on shoulders giving wingers, and I can't even think that way. It's like I've been so poisoned by our current climate. I'm like, well, what would a band do these days? Like, they'd have to do some sort of video conference concert or something. But at some point, we're going to be back out there, and people are going to want to see these bands. All right.
Final news story for today. Remember the long-running case against Led Zeppelin? It's been in the courts for frickin' ever.
No, I didn't know
copyright
this.
Infringement of Stairway to Heaven.
Oh, that.
Sued by Randy California from the band
Of all the songs
Spirit.
they've stolen, why that one?
Yeah. Right. So, essentially, the courts ruled back in March that they've never extended copyright protection to just a few notes. That a 4-note sequence, common in the music field, is not copyrightable. Well, it's finally over because they tried to get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court told the estate of Randy California, give it up, bro. It's over. So
they didn't say the word bro, though. That doesn't sound very Supreme Courty.
Yeah.
It said brosif at the story.
Yeah, that's a weird lot in life where you accuse somebody of stealing your song or your intellectual property or whatever that thing is. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But then you spend the next 14 years pursuing it, like at a certain point, who's the joke on? Like, write a song. Or isn't it's sort of like, well, then if you could write a song, or at least you could write the chords to the song that's one of the biggest songs in rock and roll of all time, then just go out and write another killer song or 10 killer songs. Like, kind of get on with it. So,
right.
I feel kind of bad for this dude. On the other hand, is Led Zeppelin ever coming back in any version? Like, once at a certain point, John Bonham's got a kid. He's a big drummer,
right,
so you can. Jason Bonham, you can physically take guys with the same last name and like swap them out in different position. You become like Barry Bonds.
They did play one small show about a decade, 20 years ago, maybe, with Jason Bonham on drums. But as far as...
Do Page and Plant still perform together?
No.
Oh, I don't know.
Robert Plant is releasing another solo album. It might be out already. I'll have to double check on that. But I think when Bonham died, Led Zeppelin died. All the guys said that. And so it's just wishful thinking, mostly on the part of radio disc jockeys who just miss Led Zeppelin so much that's anytime that comes back in the news, oh, we might get Led Zeppelin again. No, it's not going to happen.
Will we ever have that kind of prolific rock and roll from a band, in the sense that now things are sampled and there's DJ this and collaborating with that, but will we ever have that band that just cranks out, I won't even say hits, I'll just say some hits, some not hits, but just incredible masterpiece songs, just one after the other for prolonged periods of time? And if so, or maybe why not? I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, there are bands out there. There's contemporary bands, and Foo Fighters sell a lot of tickets and sell albums and things like that. But is there going to be another Led Zeppelin?
I think the Foo Fighters probably have the biggest chance to be that, but I don't I really don't think so. I think that the world has changed in so many different ways in the last 30 years that I just don't think longevity is a part of it anymore.
Well, Brian,
there's still the Rolling Stones. They're still touring.
Brian is a big Beatles fan, of course.
Right.
The Foo Fighters, while I like the Foo Fighters, they don't vary like the Beatles vary. They don't have the range that the Beatles had or that Led Zeppelin had. Right. Led Zeppelin and the Beatles had many different hits from like many different genres in a sense.
Let me also point out that the Foo Fighters at this point are 25 years old. If they were going to do it, they would have done it by now. What I'm saying is the Beatles released 10 albums in 9 years. Mm-hmm. Zeppelin released 9 albums in 10 years. Or whatever that formula is. Those were prolific bands that were just teeming with creativity. There's so many guys in the band could do so many things. And also, like Dawson said, you're so fractured. It's all about Spotify. It's all about singles. It's all about YouTube. Like I just don't see these album-oriented bands being that big, like a big, like the Zeppelin of their day.
Well, the format in the 70s especially was you wrote a record, you recorded that record, then you went out and toured that record. While you're out touring that record, you're writing the next record. So as soon as you get home, you're back in the studio with a new record, then back out on tour, and then while you're on the road, on the bus, you're writing the next record. Right. And so that's how bands were able to come out with a new record every single year. They'd tour in the summer, write an album, cut in the winter, and then put it out. And that just doesn't happen anymore.
Thus, every third song was about being in a tour bus and fucking groupies when they rolled into a town near you.
Tells it all.
So it's interesting what you and Brian are saying, which is maybe there will never be another Led Zeppelin, not because there won't be a talented group of people that come together. It's that formatically it's not going to be conducive. You're not going to have – you need that rhythm of the format, and that format is not going to force anyone to come out with those great albums anymore.
And force is the good word. The lifestyle would force an album every year.
And Dawson, the Zeppelin came out with their Led Zeppelin 1 in 1969. Imagine they had come out just 10 years earlier, formed a band. Like, their style of music would not have worked, wouldn't have been played, it wouldn't have been acknowledged. Like that was the era of 2.5-minute songs played on the radio. They couldn't do Stairway to Heaven or any of their albums.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all about where you are, when you are, and then, of course, who you are.
Yeah. Also, what you're ingesting. Like, you needed a lot of pot to listen to a 7-minute song versus, Jerry and the Dreamers doing this diamond ring doesn't shine for me anymore. And this stuff was like also pop, 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 pop. Back then, it just didn't work. And then you usher in this sort of pot kind of fueled vibe. And if you think about it, like, that stuff you're just made to get stoned and listen to a 7-minute song, which just didn't work with ditties, yes.
And you can thank the Beatles for that because they were the biggest band. They're like, fuck that, we're doing the White Album. We're doing double albums full of fucking experimental beeps and boops.
Right.
And they drove the industry.
And the music business during the Beatles was all on singles. It was actually Led Zeppelin who changed that. Their manager, Peter Grant, was like, we're not doing singles. You want it? Buy the album.
By the way, I think Gary Lewis and the Playboys, who was Jerry Lewis's son, sung this Diamond Ring. Yeah, Gary Lewis and the Playboys had a couple of hits. This Diamond Ring was probably one of them, and maybe one other hit. And that was Jerry Lewis's kid. I bet they had a wonderful relationship as adults. And that was they had a couple of top 10 hits. Or top, I don't know, they had some couple of number ones like this Diamond Ring and stuff.
Diamond Ring, Count Me In.
Count Me In. Oh, if you got Count Me In. If you want to hear the antithesis, the polar opposite of a Led Zeppelin song that came just 4 years later, basically in terms of time, maybe 5 years later in time, Count Me In. If you want to hear what people were listening to, and what was it, Chris? 1965?
Dawson,
Yeah,
match this up
65.
with the Immigrant Song.
This is right after the Diamond Ring. This Diamond Ring.
All right, tell me, can you hear this okay, Brian?
Yeah.
All right, here it is.
If you need someone to count on, count me in.
It's timeless.
Someone you can rely on. Through thick
Reach number
and
2.
thin.
Number 2 in the
Number
country.
2.
When you start to count the ones that you might ever doubt.
This is 3 years before Led Zeppelin.
This is the same riff as Fool in the Rain.
Right.
Count me out. When you count the ones that want you.
This could be on Sesame Street to teach people how to count.
If I'm not first,
This is 65. Count me blue
just be sure you count on me. And
when
This is
the
outrageous.
counting's through. Count on me madly in love with the organ.
The Beatles did Sgt. Pepper a year and a half later.
I know.
Wow.
It was
What a chasm.
if you need someone
Could you imagine young Gary Lewis like saying to Jerry, "Hey, I come up with another hit, son. I work with Sinatra and Dean Martin. That's not a fucking hit. It's number 2 on the American Billboard." Yeah, get the fuck out of my office.
when you're down and out. Count me in through thick and thin.
Count me out. Here. All right. Yes, we went from bubblegum to the greatest. The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones all came right on
Right
the
after,
heels
yeah.
of that, and that was an obscure song. That was number 2 in America. Everyone, all right, nice job, Dawson.
Thank you, boss.
And Brian.
Oh, one more
one
tiny
more.
bit of news.
Oh,
Keith Richards still alive. Just
Just
want
saying
to put
it.
it out there.
is that Mike August said that?
We'll bring it home, and then we'll bring in Chuck Liddell and Jeff Cesario, and we'll do the sports. Bring it home. You got it.
Don't worry, Gina. Your job is safe. That was the news with Mike Dawson.
All right, adios, guys. I'll be back to talk to Chuck the Iceman Liddell and Jeff Cesario right after this.